What is up, guys? Welcome back to another NFL mock draft. This is going to be a way too early 2026 mock draft. This order is going to change pretty substantially, I would imagine, as the simulator currently has the Jets at number 1, but they just knocked off the Bengals today for their first win of the season. So I would assume that this order will not be anywhere close to what it is at the end, but we're going to try this anyways. So, starting off with the Jets, I think you have to look at their quarterback situation and just know that, Justin Fields can't be the guy long term. I mean, what have we seen from him on any of his stops with the Steelers, the Bears, or the Jets? I really don't see an NFL quarterback when I see him on the field. He's nice and dynamic with his legs, but I don't think that guy can read a defense or make any of the throws you need to. So you got to look for a quarterback who can make all the throws, and for me, that's Fernando Mendoza. Only 1-year starter at Indiana so far, but he's been putting up ridiculous numbers this year, and I think he's the clear front runner of this QB class. This quarterback class, it's a fairly deep quarterback class, but not a quarterback class with a bunch of high draft pick names, in my opinion. These guys are only going to go high because of demand, in my eyes. But, when you compare them to other draft classes, I really do think this is a weaker quarterback class overall. So the Jets should get the best guy in this class. That's Fernando Mendoza. He started his career at California playing for the Golden Bears, and, he made a big leap and jumped to Indiana. And there really is no guarantee that, the Big Ten's a bit harder league than the ACC is. So there's no guarantee your production is going to match when you jump to a different league like that. And so I think that, he's really shined in that environment. And, him and Curt Cignetti's offense, he looks really good. He looks like a perfect distributor of the football, which is kind of what the NFL demands nowadays. The game's more technical than ever. It requires quarterbacks to make a lot of advanced reads and throws that, they otherwise wouldn't normally be making. So I think that's the quarterback for the future of the Jets behind that young and really talented offensive line. And they've got a few playmakers in the running back room and the receiving room. So I think you get Fernando Mendoza in there and get him developing as fast as you can. So the Saints at 2, there's a couple different places we could go with the Saints. I do feel like they have overall a pretty decent roster. I like their playmakers. They've got a lot of speed on offense. I like their running back room. I like Alvin Kamara a lot. So I also think they should look at quarterback. And the guy I'm going to draft for them is Garrett Nussmeier. I know he's had a pretty big slide over the last few weeks. In my opinion, he's playing injured. I personally think he's dealing with some sort of lower body injury. It just doesn't seem like he can get all the velocity he once could on his throws, especially earlier on. He looked really good in that Clemson game. Looked like he could make a bunch of reads against a really aggressive front seven that Clemson defense has. And, I think that's something that, he might be dealing with an injury, and that's why the production isn't quite there. But, another important thing to note is that the Saints offensive coordinator is actually his dad, Doug Nussmeier. So I think there could be a bit of nepotism involved there, and the Saints could draft Garrett Nussmeier here, second overall. I mean, he's got great leadership qualities as well. LSU gave him number 18. LSU fans know all about what number 18 means to that program. They don't just give that number out to anyone. You have to earn that. So I think Garrett Nussmeier, he fits the culture well as well because Louisiana, it's a bit different culture-wise. You have to understand what New Orleans is as a city, and, if you're going to represent that team on your helmet, I think Garrett Nussmeier is the perfect quarterback for that scenario. 3, the Titans. I firmly believe they have their quarterback of the future. Cam Ward has made some incredible throws this year. He just gets constantly let down by that offensive line. So the main priority for the Titans this offseason through free agency and the draft has to be protecting Cam Ward. You got to get some more options there. I like Peter Skoronski and I like J.C. Latham up front, but you got to add a third guy in there. So, for me, I'm going to go with Isaiah World here out of Oregon. He just transferred in from Nevada this year, as he's been the starting left tackle for them all season and has looked really good. He had a bit of a shaky performance this week against Wisconsin, but outside of that, I think Isaiah World has been, pretty much a franchise left tackle, especially, going up in the competition level from Nevada to Oregon. That's a pretty sizable jump. Dan Lanning obviously trusts him really well to put him out there week 1 as the starter, and, he's only going to go against more top pass rush talent the rest of the season too. So I think that's a franchise left tackle right there. Then you can put J.C. Latham back over to the right side where he was in college at Alabama. And then you can have 3 good linemen there, and hopefully you sign some more in free agency. But overall, I think that's the start to building that Titans O-line up. At 4, the Browns. I don't know if the Browns are really in a spot where they should take a quarterback here or not. Dylan Gabriel's looked pretty bad. They haven't even, looked at Shedeur yet, but I just think that, throwing a rookie quarterback behind that offensive line they're going to have next year is going to be pretty rough. Jack Conklin's always hurt. Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller are getting older. I just don't know if they have much future with any of those guys, really. So for me, if I was the Browns with the 2 first-round picks you have this year, I would try to stack up on, better players, just a team build in general. Get a bunch of guys that have really high floors that you can build on for the future and possibly select your quarterback next year, or look in free agency in the offseason. Because right now there's a quarterback resurgence where, guys like Sam Darnold, guys like Daniel Jones, Mac Jones even, they've been forgotten about, and, eventually teams have picked them up, like the 49ers picking up Mac Jones. He's been able to win games for them. Maybe the Browns could do that with somebody as well, find a quarterback who's been kind of cast off to the side and, sign him for a cheap deal and, see what you can win next year. But overall, I really just don't think this is the QB class for the Browns to really invest in their future with. I think they should just be getting as many young, high floor, high ceiling players as they can. So for me, I'm going to go with another offensive lineman here to help rebuild that line. I think you should go Caden Proctor here. I know this particular draft simulator has guys above him, but I think he fits the bill for a franchise left tackle, in terms of his physical traits, his ability in the run game. It's just, he's very inconsistent against bad teams. It's really strange. And the biggest matchups that Alabama has, he'll show up and just be lights out, but then they'll play, lesser competition and he'll get cooked by an edge rusher for no reason at all. So I think he's got some consistency issues to work out with, but if you want a franchise left tackle, that guy's got all the tools to succeed. Here at the Dolphins, I think that they have to go, shift their philosophy towards physical football. And if you're going to do that, you got to draft in the trenches. So for me, I would go Francis Maui Noah here out of Miami. He's already a local prospect, already in town, across the way, plays in the same stadium the Dolphins play. So, why not go with him here? I just think that Tua is locked in long term. You can't get out of that horrible contract they gave him. So, you may as well protect him in the meantime and try to just get as much done as you can in the meantime until you can get out of that contract or draft a different quarterback in the future. So I'm going to go with Francis Maui Noah here. And, he's a right tackle as well, so he's actually protecting Tua's blind side. I think that works out pretty well because I haven't really gotten their philosophy towards the O-line in the past. I think their strategy mainly revolves around, we'll get the ball out too fast for the pass rush to get there, so we just don't have to invest in the offensive line, but that clearly hasn't worked. And paying Teron Armstead to be a franchise left tackle when your quarterback's a lefty, just it doesn't make a lot of sense because that's not Tua's blind side. You want your franchise tackle to be on the blind side of the quarterback. So I think that you get Francis Maui Noah on that offensive line. That's a great start. He's had some rough moments against pass rushers this year as well, but he's an absolute people mover in the run game. And if you want to start changing the culture in the trenches about what other teams think of the Dolphins, I think that's a perfect guy for it. 6, the Giants. This is a very intriguing young team now that we know what they have with Jackson Dart, with Cam Skattebo, with Abdul Carter, a few guys they hit on last year. I think that they should continue on that trend. Their line has been pretty bad as well, but I think they should continue on the trend and just drafting, any good player they can come across, because that's clearly what their philosophy was last year is we'll stick in the top 5 and take Abdul Carter, even if it means we're missing out on, Cam Ward, our top potential quarterback, because they just traded back into the first round to get Jackson Dart anyway. So I think they've got their guy at quarterback now. Why not, just team build in general? And for me, I'm going to draft my number 1 player in this draft, Caleb Downs, to them. I think Caleb Downs is the best safety prospect to come out of college since Kyle Hamilton came out of Notre Dame. This guy just has everything. When he's covering receivers and tight ends, he looks like a lockdown corner. He takes them away. Nobody gets catches against Caleb Downs when he's stride for stride with them. In run defense, he looks like a linebacker flying downhill, and he hits like a linebacker too. He really packs a punch when he flies downhill. He's a Saban guy. He was originally, recruited by Nick Saban, played 1 year at Alabama, was a starter instantly, day 1 in Nick Saban's defense. That tells you all you need to know. When you're starting in the GOAT's defense like that, this guy has everything you want to do. He might be the best safety I've ever seen at defending screens. And, I just mean he knows a screen is happening before it really develops, and he just flies to the point and makes the hit, and he just doesn't miss the tackle. I've never really seen him miss a tackle. I think he's the most complete player in this draft. It's just unfortunate he's a safety because the NFL is not going to value that safety positional group as much as the quarterbacks. But, if positional value wasn't a thing, this would absolutely be the number 1 player in the draft. I think he's the only field tilting player in this draft. I believe he's absolutely a blue chip prospect, and he's going to make an instant impact on that Giants defense. He's an upgrade over Tyler Nubin for sure, and he might even be an upgrade over Javon Holland day one he steps on the field. So I'm going to go with Caleb Downs to the Giants. That's an absolute steal at 6. I think, just with the way the draft will work out, somebody's going to get Caleb Downs at a really good price, and in this instance it's the Giants, and I think that just gives them another elite player to potentially build on in the future. So the Ravens at 7, I don't believe they're going to stick at 7 if Lamar Jackson comes back, but we're going to give him Ruben Bain Jr. Not much thought over that. They just traded Odafe Owe to the Chargers. They've been having some other injury concerns with Justin Madubuike going down for the year. I think that Ruben Bain has been, his freshman year, he looked unbelievable. I couldn't believe how good he was for a true freshman, and he was flying off the tape, but there were some other Miami guys that were kind of eating in front of him, so he had to wait his turn. And then, last year he went down with an injury and missed, I think half of the season, so we couldn't really see how he had, jumped from year 1 to year 2. But now in year 3, he's been dominant. There's even been some people saying he could be in the Heisman conversation as an edge rusher. I mean, we know that never really happens, but I think that, Ruben Bain is easily edge 1 in this class. He's a very complete pass rusher. He's got the pass rush plan. He plays the run well. I would just like to see him get better, at reading RPOs, because he gets fooled a lot by these RPO games that the college quarterbacks like to play, college offenses like to throw at him. And, he gets slowed down by that quite a bit, but I think that's something, he's a very young player. He's only a true junior, so I think that's something he could develop past, with some good coaching, especially the Ravens. They have a great system for coaching young players up. So Ruben Bain to the Ravens, he's absolutely a top 10 pick, should be a top 5 pick, but just with the way quarterbacks get taken, that might not necessarily happen. So the Raiders at 8, I think you have to go with Dante Moore here out of Oregon. Really just looked like a calm and in-control quarterback so far this season. Going on the road and beating Penn State is as impressive of a victory as you'll see from a young quarterback. I think there's still a lot of road left to go for him. I think he has a lot of things he needs to develop, but overall, going to the Raiders, I think the Raiders have a good young offensive line that people don't really talk about as much. They have Ashton Genty next to him. Brock Bowers, franchise tight end. I think you get him in Las Vegas. That's the perfect place for him to land and work with Pete Carroll and potentially developing into a really good quarterback in the league. He hasn't had the greatest last couple weeks. He went down injured this week, actually, so we'll see how that impacts his future here in the next couple weeks. But I think, the Raiders would love to get a young quarterback like that. And, continuing the quarterback conversation, I think the Cardinals are actually at a quarterback deficit right now. I haven't seen it from Kyler Murray the last 2 years. I really don't know, what more we need to wait for him, because, you go back to like 2019, 2020, 2021 even, Kyler was a borderline MVP candidate. He looked like one of the top playmaking quarterbacks in the league, and I just have not seen that out of him in the last 2 years. So I think the Cardinals have to start thinking about what they're going to do here at quarterback, and for me that would be Ty Simpson out of Alabama. This guy is, he's a very classic example of waiting your turn, because, this is the NIL era. He could have easily gone and, got a bag in the transfer portal, but he waited his turn behind a few different quarterbacks, Jalen Milroe for 2 years as well. And he's really shined in that offense this year. I think that Alabama's done a great job of putting him in positions to just, show off what he can do. This guy can really spin the ball. When he's well protected, I've never seen a quarterback be able to just throw into tight windows like that as much and as frequently as he has. But, there's also a lot of projecting you have to do with these Alabama quarterbacks, because they're in a perfect scenario where they have elite receivers who are always open. They're not really throwing into pressure much. They're not really throwing into double coverage a lot, because their receivers are just always, in the right place at the right time. So, but I think, the Cardinals should give him a try here. You got to go a different route than Kyler Murray, in my opinion. So the Bengals at 10, I just feel like the Bengals are at a really tough spot. They can't protect Joe Burrow year after year. We've seen that a bunch. They can't seem to draft offensive linemen that make an impact day one, but you got to keep trying here. So I'm going to go with Caleb Lomu out of Utah, one of 2 Utah tackles that I think are going to go really high in this draft, Spencer Fano being the other one. But I think you gotta make an effort to protect Joe Burrow that you haven't previously made. So drafting Caleb Lomu there should help. I think he gets moved a little bit in the run game, but overall, none of these tackles are going to be perfect. It's just not that tackle class where you see guys going really high who are finished products outside of, maybe Isaiah World. But I think you got to take that shot here with the Bengals and sign, aggressively pursue in free agency. That's just kind of a common theme in every offseason is there's a lot of teams with an offensive line problem. And I just think that's where the league is at, is that teams aren't able to really develop these offensive linemen like they used to. And so a lot of quarterbacks are just kind of, getting hurt from this. So Caleb Lomu to the Bengals at 10. With that, the Rams, their first of their 2 first-round picks they have. I think, the Rams are in a position where Matthew Stafford's aging out. You could possibly look at potentially getting a quarterback here, but I also think, a guy like Arvell Reese would be a really fun playmaker in that defense. You look at their defensive line, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Byron Young, Colby Young. They've got a ton of young talents on that defensive line that are really going to be problems for years to come. If you add Arvell Reese into that, like you're that's a top 10 defense waiting to happen right there. Arvell Reese, he didn't really start last year just because Ohio State had so many good linebackers in front of him, but he's really taken that position, on this year, and he looks good from the edge too. They put him at the edge a lot, and I've seen him throw left tackles around like they're no problem, even though he gives up a lot of size, a lot of weight. But he's just got speed. He's got pass rush moves. He hits really hard as well, which is impressive. I mean, that's what you expect out of Ohio State. But I think Arvell Reese is this top 15 type of player that they could potentially need on their defense. And, it's just one of those things that adds to an already good defense, and why not make it better? So the Commanders at 12, I'm going to go with Jeremiah Love, the running back out of Notre Dame. I think this running back class is a one-man show with him at the top. I don't really think there's any other running backs even close to him. This guy's incredible. He reminds me a lot of Adrian Peterson, where you kind of just see him on the field in college and go, yeah, that guy's going to be a contributor day one in the NFL. I think he's got to bulk up a little bit. Personally, he just looks a bit light for his frame, but I think that's just kind of the where he's at in his development. And once he gets in an NFL weight room, that would be great. The Commanders, they have Krosky Merritt as their running back, but I think you need a franchise running back there next to Jaden Daniels. That would cause a lot of issues for defenses. And I think Jeremiah Love is the perfect guy for that. He's just as good of a receiver as he is a runner, too. So you could run all sorts of different schemes with him, especially if Cliff Kingsbury comes back as the offensive coordinator. Nobody's been really better at using weapons than he has over the last couple of years. So why not go with Jeremiah Love there? The Vikings at 13, I think they desperately need some corner help. So, in my opinion, Mansour Delane is the best corner in this class. And, he transferred in from Virginia Tech this year to LSU, and we didn't really see what we're seeing from him at Virginia Tech. Like, he gave up a lot of touchdowns at Virginia Tech, a lot of yards, a lot of stuff over the top. And this year at LSU, it's been completely opposite. He looks like a shutdown corner. He's been hard for receivers to get off of all year. And, he's got a knack for the ball, too. I've seen him go up and make a bunch of big plays in the ball. So, to me, that gives the Vikings their corner. Overall, there's not really a corner in this class that I think is, necessarily as good as like a Will Johnson or a Sauce Gardner or a Derek Stingley a couple years ago. So I think you just kind of got to take your bet on, the top corner in this class if you're the Vikings, because their back end is getting really weak, with Harrison Smith potentially on the retirement journey here. So 14, the Texans, I think, are also at a problem. They're also at a deficit with their offensive line, and trading away Laramie Tunsil in the offseason, I don't really know if that made sense for them from a protection standpoint. Obviously, there were some cultural concerns they were worried about, but we're only here to talk about what's on the football field, and that is that the Texans really need O-line help. So I'm going to draft Spencer Fano out of Utah here. Another guy who I think looks light here, he gets moved by bull rushes quite frequently, which is a bit concerning because sometimes guys don't always, fix that when they go to the NFL. But I also have seen tackles work on it and, get in the weight room and work on their anchoring techniques. So I think Spencer Fano to the Texans gives them, an offensive lineman who would be really good to develop and protect C.J. Stroud. At 15, the Cowboys, this is their first of their 2 first-round picks. Jerry Jones talked a lot about wanted to get Pro Bowl players over the next 2 years because they have both of the Packers' first-round picks in 2026 and 2027. And so for me, I'm going to go with Carnell Tate right here. Carnell Tate's a beast. He's an elite route runner. He's got physical traits, to be a wide receiver in the NFL. I think he's unfortunately, up until this year, his most famous moment was absolutely mossing some guy on Bishop Sycamore when he was in high school, because IMG Academy played Bishop Sycamore, and he just had this crazy one-handed catch over this poor guy who had no chance. But he's in college now, and he's looked really dominant at Ohio State alongside Jeremiah Smith in that offense. He's a contested jump ball guy. He can go up and get any ball, and I think that the Cowboys are in a position where they might not want to pay George Pickens all of what he's asking this year. So why not get a cheap replacement for George Pickens and still have the similar production next to CeeDee Lamb? I think Carnell Tate's a great fit for them too, and could potentially fit that mold of what Jerry Jones was saying about wanting Pro Bowl players right off the bat. So at 16 for the Panthers, I think the Panthers are in a position where they need some flashy playmakers on defense. And I'm going to go back to a player who's had a very long road to this point, and that's Harold Perkins Jr. out of LSU. We've seen him play literally every position in the defense outside of corner. We've seen him up in the A gap as a rusher up the middle. We've seen him as a true middle linebacker. We've seen him almost as a safety in that defense. They just play him every which way they can imagine, it seems like. And I think that might cause a bit of a hesitation in NFL GMs' minds about where he would actually fit in, what he could actually do. Because if you wear a lot of hats like that, that might not always translate to the NFL. But I think the Panthers are in a situation where they just need any sort of playmaker in their defense, because Derek Brown's kind of a one-man show. They have J.C. Horn on the back end, but I think you need someone who can fly all over the field in that defense. And, for me, Harold Perkins is that guy. So I think the Panthers would be really happy with that pick there at 16. So 17, the Bears. I think you could look at a few different guys here, but I'm going to personally go for Mateo Uiagalelei out of Oregon, the edge rusher. I think the Bears, they like to look at defense. They like to look at guys who have a lot of hype around them, especially even going back to their high school days. And Mateo Uiagalelei had a ton of hype coming out of high school. It was a big deal for Oregon to get him. And, he's one of those guys, he actually reminds me a lot of JT Tuimoloau, who came out of Ohio State last year, where he's just a high-floor run defender, really high-floor pass rusher, just gives you constant effort, high-motor stuff each game. He's never going to rack up 12 or 13 sacks, but, he might give you 7 or 8 and give you really good run defense. So I think the Bears could use someone like that opposite Montez Sweat. He's a very similar physical build to Montez Sweat too, so I think that's something the Bears would be interested in, is getting another pass rusher opposite Montez in that defense. So the Chiefs at 18, I'm going to go with Jordan Tyson, the receiver out of Arizona State there. I think Jordan Tyson's been incredible this year. He's exactly the type of receiver that's succeeding in the NFL right now. When you look at JSN, when you look at Emeka Egbuka, those elite swift route runners are what wins at the NFL level right now. The corner talent just isn't keeping up with these route running technicians that are in the league now, and I think Jordan Tyson could be that for the Chiefs. Without Rashee Rice in that lineup, they just look like they can't really pass the ball. I don't think defenses are scared of anyone outside of Rashee Rice, to be honest with you. So why not get another receiver in that offense? And then, you have a lot of speed with Xavier Worthy, obviously, on the outside too. But getting Jordan Tyson in there, another option for Mahomes, I think that's a great pick for them. So back to the Browns at 19. I still just don't think they should really go for a quarterback here. I really think they need receiver help. They need more dynamic pieces in that receiving core, because it's kind of just Jerry Jeudy right now and a bunch of other guys. Cedric Tillman doesn't really do it for me personally, so I'm going to go with Makai Lemon here out of USC. He's had a really good year for USC. He's been their number one option. I really like him out of the slot. Another really good route running receiver. He's a bit of a smaller guy, but I think that as long as he can rely on his skills of getting open, he'll work just fine in the league. Reminds me a lot of like a Zay Flowers type receiver who's just very swift, gets good separation, has solid hands. I think the Browns would love someone like that to potentially work into their offense, because they've got a lot of young pieces that are coming along very nicely. And, you could add Makai Lemon there. And, we already took Caden Proctor for them in the top 5. So that's 2 more young high floor players for the future for them. The Niners at 20, this is the easiest pick for me in this entire draft. They're going to take Keldrick Falk 9 times out of 10, I would say. Anytime there's an athletic, big edge rusher, especially if they're from the SEC too, the 49ers are just going to take him if they're on the board. That's, what they want to do. John Lynch loves front 7 players. He just, whenever the trade deadline comes around, John Lynch is looking for an edge rusher to trade for. They just want an elite pass rush. They want physical guys up front. That's what the 49ers have been built on, especially bringing Robert Saleh back. They're not really going to go outside of their mold as long as John Lynch is there. So I think Keldrick Falk will be there. Not really an elite production type of edge rusher, but definitely a bunch of physical tools there who could develop alongside Mykel Williams, who they drafted last year. Chargers at 21, I'm going to give them Peter Woods. Personally, I don't know that I see it as much as other draft analysts might with Peter Woods here. He's kind of just an in-between guy. They can't really seem to decide if he's an edge rusher or a D tackle, and he's really small and compact. But if you look at the Chargers D-line, the way they're made right now, I think that they have a lot of guys who are actually that kind of mold. You look at Tier Tart in the middle. That's a small, compact guy. You look at Poona Ford in the past, too, that they had. Those are two small, compact D linemen that aren't really good at rushing the passer, but are elite run stuffers. And I think Peter Woods could be that kind of guy for the Chargers as well. So another piece for Harbaugh to work with on the defensive line. At 22 for the Steelers, I'm going to go look at the quarterbacks again here because I just think, you can't guarantee that Rodgers is going to come back in 2026. And even if he does, is he going to give you what he's given you this year? So for me, I'm going to look at Taylon Green here out of Arkansas. I know this simulator has him as the 125th best player, but quarterbacks are going to go, man. If there's a team that says they really like one of these guys, they're going to take him in the first round just so that another team doesn't get him. I really like Taylon Green. He's an elite runner with his legs, good at scrambling away from pressure. He's got a pretty big arm too. He's 6'6", ideal frame to see over the offensive lines in the NFL. So I think if you're the Steelers, you really got to look for your next guy. Even if Rodgers comes back, Taylon Green will sit behind him and learn anything he can from him. So I think Taylon Green's been a really good player. He's someone that nobody's really talking about, but we've seen him start at the SEC level at a high level too. I mean, Arkansas hasn't won a lot of games, but they've been in most of their games they played. They score a lot of points, and a lot of it's because of him. He's the leader of that team as well. So I think Taylon Green would be an underrated pickup for the Steelers there. The Rams at 23, I'm also going to look at quarterback here, and I know he's been out since his ankle injury, but Drew Aller, I think, is still worthy of first-round buzz. Hasn't really put a lot to show for it on the field, to be honest with you. I feel like he's just been riding his high school hype because he was a 5-star recruit throughout his career, but Penn State also hasn't really shown the willingness to kind of turn him loose and feel like, throw it down the field much. It's kind of a weird dynamic they've had there. And, I think Drew Aller would be an amazing pickup for Sean McVay. And, they would get him in that Rams offense, get him behind Stafford and learn all of the ins and outs of their thing. And then just, turn it over to him when the time is right. But I still think, Drew Aller would have probably been the first overall pick last year if he had decided to go. That's just how highly, NFL scouts think of him because of his physical tools that he has. He's a good scrambler as well. And, in today's NFL, you really got to be able to use your legs effectively and at the right moments if you want to succeed. So I think Drew Aller, coming off of that injury is a bit of a risk, but the Rams they're looking for their next guy, and I think Drew Aller's got, all the tools to succeed if they were to pick him here. So the Lions at 24 here. I'm going to go back to the defense here. I think they could use another edge rusher outside of Aiden Hutchinson, and for me that's TJ Parker out of Clemson. Another true junior. He's played 3 years, played right away in Dabo Swinney's defense as a freshman, and man, as a freshman, this guy could really bring the hits. Like he hits really hard. And I think that's something Dan Campbell would love in that defense as well. He would fit that Lions culture, that physical, aggressive, and violent culture that they've been building. You put TJ Parker on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson, and that's a really hard duo to deal with. The only thing is like he's a completely different build than Aiden Hutchinson is. He's about 6'2", 6'3", so much more compact, whereas Hutch is about length and speed, So I don't think he's really going to give you that attacking ability, to go attack like a tackle's shoulder as he's coming around the edge. But in the run game, he's really good, solid, hard to move, and I think that's a great pickup for the Lions. So the Bills at 25, I'm going to go with Chris Bell here out of Louisville. I just think the Bills might not have the receiving talent that they need for Josh Allen to kind of get over the hump. I really like Keon Coleman. Is he a 1, though? You got to ask yourself that. I just don't think he's a 1. And, Khalil Shakir, they just paid him a bunch of money, too. Another really nice option. But I think a lot of that offense runs through their tight ends and James Cook. And, if they could get just one more option on, the outside of that offense, I think that would be a really good move for them. So I'm going to go with Chris Bell here. He just had a really nice game against Miami, which is an elite defense in college. So I think that that's a great pickup there. So next with the Broncos at 26, I'm going to go with Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon. This tight end class, to sugarcoat it, is really bad. There's just not a lot of options outside of Sadiq, in my opinion. So whichever team gets Kenyon Sadiq is getting the best tight end in this draft easily. He can block and receive really well. So I think he's the complete package as a tight end. He looks really good in that Oregon offense as well. And why not give Bo Nix as many options to throw to as well? Like, they have Evan Ingram right now, but what does he give you in the run game? And Sean Payton likes to run the football as much as he can. So I think Kenyon Sadiq is a good young answer for that Broncos offense. Maximize the potential of Bo Nix while he's on a cheap contract as well, So I think that's a good weapon for the Broncos. 27, I'm going to go with another one of my favorite players in this draft. That's Anthony Hill Jr. out of Texas. He just had a monster game against Kentucky last weekend, and I love this linebacker. Like, he had 8 sacks last year. You just don't see that type of production out of college linebackers much. He actually reminds me a lot of Leo Chanel out of Wisconsin a few years ago, where he's an impactful linebacker. Impactful true middle linebacker, in the pass rush and the run game. And, he's a freak athlete too. Like, I've seen him jump over running backs while he's on his way to the quarterback. And that's just that attacking mindset that, will really succeed in the NFL. I think he could cover too. He could run with any sort of tight end in the middle as well. So the Buccaneers, they're going to need to think what they're doing next with Lavonte David. Is Lavonte David going to come back? He's been an unreal piece to that defense for years and, for the franchise for a long time. But you got to start thinking about what you're going to do next. And I think Anthony Hill is the perfect fill-in for Lavonte David. I think he could even start alongside him next year if they bring him back. And you would have a really good young linebacker who could potentially, carry that torch in the next 10 years of being a really good pro. So I love Anthony Hill Jr. Any team that gets him is getting one of the best players in this draft. Again, it's just unfortunate that he's not, linebacker's not necessarily a premium position, but he can really be a difference maker at the next level. I think that, he's looked really good in this Texas defense for a couple of years now, so I don't really know what else you need to see from him. But yeah, Buccaneers getting Anthony Hill would be a great pick. I think the Seahawks next at 28 really need more from their pass rush. I don't really like a lot of their edge guys. It's a lot of they're just a lot of guys who are, they're high floor guys, but not high ceiling guys either. They just don't get a lot of sacks. They don't have a lot of production. Maybe they're pretty solid in the run game, but their interior of their line is pretty set for the next few years. I just think, getting a guy that could give you some sacks off the edge would be a great option for them. So for me, I'm going to look at David Bailey out of Texas Tech. He just transferred in from Stanford this year because Texas Tech, they invested heavily in their transfer portal, spending almost $20 million is what has been reported in the transfer portal. And I think David Bailey's been amazing. He has a 3-sack game on record this year. Total pass rush expert as well. He's got all the moves you want. I've seen spin moves, I've seen jabs from him, I've seen the ghost rush out of him. That's a really complete package right there. He might not give you what you want out of the run, but I think the Seahawks really need that guy who can go hunt the quarterback. They just don't really have that right now, and David Bailey to me is absolutely a first-round player. I think he could sneak into the end of the first round to a team like this, that's wanting to add to their pass rush. So the Patriots at 29, I'm also going to go into the trenches with them. I'm going to give them LT Overton. Really versatile player in that Alabama front seven. Originally started his career at Texas A&M. He was a part of that monstrous recruiting class that Jimbo Fisher had. I believe it was the class of 2022, where they had Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart in that class, Shamar Turner in that class, Anthony Lucas, a bunch of crazy high school prospects in that class that just, it's the best high school recruiting class of all time in terms of, ratings-wise. Those guys didn't really coalesce on the field, but LT Overton has found a really good home at Alabama because Texas A&M wasn't really interested in using him, I guess. So he's looked really good to me. He's got the physical tools that I think, would be really good in that Patriots D-line. They just need another impact player off the edge besides Harold Landry. And, I think you could potentially move him inside as well. I've seen him play a lot of reps from the interior, so to me, LT Overton is that guy that the Patriots would potentially need. It would level up their pass rush, and he plays the run really solidly as well, so you're not giving up anything there. And, he's a young player, too. The best is yet to come from him. He doesn't really have a lot of wear and tear on his body. He's only really started for 2 years out of his college career. So I really like that pick for the Patriots. Going into the Eagles, you can kind of apply the Howie Roseman filter to any of the Eagles picks, which is SEC guys. Like, that just seems to be what, SEC or Georgia guys are kind of what Howie likes to pick. So I'm going to look at Colton Hood here from Tennessee. This guy, he transferred in from Colorado, so leaving, Deion Sanders' umbrella is a big risk because there's no guarantee you're going to have the same exposure to the NFL scouts in another program. But he's gone to Tennessee and done that. He looks really good in this defense, especially because Tennessee's down their top 2 corners. Jermod McCoy, who's actually still on the board here, he hasn't played at all this year because of an ankle injury. And then their other corner, Ricky Gibson Jr., been hurt all of the season as well. And it just really hasn't mattered because Colton Hood stood up, has he's been up to the task all season, facing some really tough receivers. And I think that the Eagles might also need some help, in that secondary when you're not throwing at Quinyon Mitchell or Cooper DeJean. So I really like the Colton Hood pick there. Just reinforces the back end of that elite Eagles defense. We know what they pack up front with those guys on the D-line. So adding a good corner there, I think that would really help their unit as a whole. The Cowboys at 31. Let's continue thinking about the offense here. I think they could use a running back, and I'm going to draft. I said Jeremiah Love was at the top of this class by a long shot, and I really think that's true. He has been for a long time. Even going back to last year, I think he could have been in the mix as a top running back last season. So I'm going to go with his teammate here, Jadarian Price. He's not really ranked that highly on these draft boards, but I truly believe that. Are we so sure that Jadarian Price isn't also a top running back in this class? I just think he's been overshadowed by Jeremiah Love a lot. But, he's a really physical running back between the tackles. Doesn't quite give you the receiving upside, but I could absolutely see Jadarian Price being an RB1 in a team, and I think the Cowboys are missing that running back. Javonte Williams has had a nice year for them, but you really want a future, plan at that position, especially if you're going to keep running the ball as, to surplus that receiving talent that they're going to have going forwards. So I think Jadarian Price is a great pick for the Cowboys, could potentially be a Pro Bowl player in the future as well. So with that, we'll move on to the Colts here at the very end. And, there's a few guys I could see, like A.J. Harris is a really good corner at defending the run. I could see the Colts taking that. Like they've wanted to invest in their secondary as of late with the guys they've paid in free agency and drafted. But, I don't know how much he gives you really as a corner in coverage. Is he a lockdown guy? Not really. But you do kind of need your corners to defend the run in this version of the NFL that we see today, where there's so many outside screens, there's so many outside zone runs. So I think A.J. Harris could be an option. Sonny Styles is an impressive-looking linebacker. They moved him from safety to linebacker, and I've just been impressed with how physical he's looked. Because usually when you move a safety into the linebacking room, you're giving up some weight there over a traditional linebacker. But Sonny Styles, to me, you can't even really tell that he was ever a safety. He just brings it every play. He's a really hard hitter, really violent in the zone. He knows where his zone is, when he's dropping back into coverage as well. So I think those are the 2 guys I would look at if I were the Colts. Amari Washington, another guy who could potentially rise up into the first round as well, because this D tackle class just isn't really anything special. But I'm going to go with Sonny Styles here. I think that gives the Colts some really good stuff in the middle of their defense that they might not have right now. I mean, what do they have? Zaire Franklin and Amir Speed there right now. Like, you can upgrade over that with this, in this class for sure. So here's kind of the overview of what we've done. This is very early, obviously. This order is going to change dramatically. I'm sure there's going to be some late risers, especially in the quarterback class, because no one's really taking full reins of this quarterback class outside of Fernando Mendoza. So for me, I think that's kind of a snapshot of what could happen. Might give you an early idea of what could happen as well with the way these players might be ranked and looked at by various scouts. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure to watch next time.